Someone asked a very, very good question. What is the difference between just good service and being kind and nice and polite to the people and being codependent? And so, do you remember the answer to that? The answer worked around where are you coming from in your response. In other words, why are you responding? Are you helping this individual out of your need to help, out of your need to be needed, whether they need it or not, even to their detriment? Are you rescuing? That is codependency. Codependency is when you are unaware of the difference between your feelings and their feelings, your thoughts, their thoughts, your needs, their needs. And you just automatically enable them. You automatically rescue them. You're stepping in to take over their lives, doing for them that which they ought to do for themselves. Now, you're never supposed to do for a child what that child can and ought to do for themselves. Once they learn how to put their clothes on, they do it. Once they learn how to pick up their room, they do it. Once they learn how, and they beg to do dishes, now you get them into it, they're locked in. From now on, they have these chores. From now on, they can help in these areas. Not every time, but at least you draw from that pool of opportunity, all right, to have them help. Now, that's very important. You do not do for others what they can and ought to do for themselves, because then you're doing it for you. On the other hand, if you're doing for somebody something that they cannot do for themselves, that they truly need help in doing, that's good service. Can you see the difference? Now, that's an important point. In other words, if what I do benefits them and helps them in a healthy way, that they need this, then it's good. But if they need to fail and suffer the pain for their irresponsible behavior, then you are enabling and rescuing and doing damage by rushing in and helping. Sometimes the hardest thing you have to do as a parent is to stand by and let your child suffer for the irresponsible decisions that they've made. Leave them mid out in the rain and you see it, you just leave it. Can you do that? It's tough, isn't it? Can you stand to see little Herkimer cry and go to bed hungry because he said a dirty word at the table? Can you allow that? Or do you have to give such inconsequential consequences that they don't even work? You see, there's a difference. When you do for somebody that which is good for them and healthy for them and it benefits them, then that's healthy. And that's not codependency, as long as you're not doing just out of your need. Now, that's very, very important. And you need to have clean motives. Very, very clean motives. All right, let's look at a dysfunctional family. Let's just take my family, for instance. I come from an alcoholic family. I'm what you call an adult child of an alcoholic. So they call me an adult child. I'm also called a para-alcoholic. My father was an alcoholic, and my mother was a codependent. So I'm a para-alcoholic. I have both bad examples. At once, I have an addictive tendency. I'm compulsive, a tendency to rage, to obsess, to be compulsive. And at the other hand, I will have a tendency to rescue. Could you see how I could be compulsively rescuing? Compulsively codependent? Well, codependency is compulsive behavior. And sometimes I can't stand it. I told you about I'd be walking down the street and kids would be smoking, remember? And I'd see some kids on the corner. I said, geez, you kids really ought not to smoke. It's not good for you. It's bad for your lungs. How many times do you think they say, gee, mister, thanks, we didn't know that. We really appreciate you stopping by and telling us that. What a guy, what a guy, what a guy. No, they call you a four-letter word, tell you to get out of their face, and then they light up 3 cigarettes and they smoke them at once. Now that's the kind of kids I run into. It's none of my business. And one of the greatest things you have to learn in life is to let go and to mind your own business. Now, great balls of fire, my parents actually left my 42-year-old sister. They left her in the house and they moved to Arizona. And they left. I cannot believe it. I lost a lot of money on that. All right. Had a bet going. Now, they left her. Is she happy? She raged. She raged. She said, you are betraying me. You're abandoning me. 42 years old. 2 kids. 17-year-old kid. He ought to have a job. But they finally cut the umbilical cord after 42 years. A lady asked my mother, are you bleeding? She says, from what? She says, well, when you cut an umbilical cord, you bleed. It hurts. How do you feel? And there's a great peace have gone out of my mother's life. A great peace. A missing piece. She had to let go. You have got to let go. Can you see that some people cannot let go? They cannot let go. It's like cutting off an arm, an appendage. They've been tied in so long, and they're so addicted, so compulsive around this child. And they go on and on. Now, my particular father, of course, was alcoholic. And he came from a home of rageaholics, of religious fanatics. And they raged. And Grandma, her dad beat her, and he drank, and he whipped him and knocked him around. And so when my grandma came along, she decided she would never drink. But she was a rageaholic. She carried the compulsivity down. The multi-generational thing came on down. They pass it from generation to generation. Now, part of this is to realize the tremendous impact that the parents have, the family has on a child. I don't think we can ever begin to realize the tremendous influence that's there. Okay, let's look at some of the roles we can get into. If this is the addict goes out, and what are they looking for? Remember, the garbage can is always looking for what? The garbage can lid, right? And so do you think my dad's going to be attracted to a healthy person? A healthy person would look at him and say, good heavens, look at that mess. Right? It's no fun to be married to an alcoholic unless you're just as sick and you need somebody to operate your stuff on. Somebody that needs to be rescued. Somebody that needs to be chased. Somebody who will hide the bottles for you. And so naturally my mother came along, and having raised all her brothers and parentalized when she was like 5, what was she looking for? Somebody to rescue. She hated it. She left home to get away from this awful situation at age 17 or something, and married my dad at 18. I was born at 19. She ran away from that home to get away from it, and she married somebody, right, in the same situation again. She repeated this. They call this tendency to repeat, all right? Repetition compulsion. And she did. Do you think she realized what she was doing? No. If she realized what she was doing, she would have run away at 1,000 miles an hour, screaming into the night, get me out of this. She wouldn't have done that. But it felt comfortable, familiar. Like family, familiar. This man needs me. Could she feel important when she felt needed? Yeah. And so she hooked in with this guy. Did they have a conflictual relationship? From the get-go. That's what it was all about. My father was always into his games, and he was addicted to crisis. And I'm addicted to crisis. My life has to be going 90 miles an hour, or I think something's wrong. You know, driving on the freeway, late, always, yelling at people, referring to their ancestry on the freeway, in and out, upset, red-faced, whiz in, whiz out, get there. But I have to start usually a little late to create that kind of a thing. All right? In my mind, I set it up. And my wife sees it coming. She says, well, you're setting yourself up again. Well, honey, don't say that. That spoils it. You know, I really can't be sincere yelling and screaming at these people on the freeway. All right. I'm addicted to crisis. My life is crisis. I will take on more than I can do because I'm addicted to crisis. I have to be in a crisis. I feel alive. How do you think it's like being married to somebody like that? Oh, bad news, right? Okay, so here I go. I'm going off in all directions. I will take on more than I can do, twice as much or 3 times as much. Then I'm always fretting. Then I can't sleep at night. Then I'm tired the next morning. But I'm alive. Isn't this wonderful? And I'm just going. My wife is a lot of white and blue. How do you think she takes that? For a while she was at her wit's end. Then finally she just quit. She just gave up. Run her to death. Just drive her crazy. Why can't you get this done? Why don't you do that? Where are you? Please plan ahead. I said, I can't plan ahead. You'll hold me to it. You know? I can't plan a vacation. I cannot plan ahead. I go every day by every day by every day and fill each day with turmoil and confusion and all the people, lives I touch. And that's the way I'm... Why? I was raised by somebody who brought me up in crisis. When we went to a picnic, do you think it was calm and peaceful? No. We'd be yelling at the ducks or yelling at a bird or yelling at the traffic or there's too many people here or you forgot this or you forgot that or where'd the brats go? I was always in trouble. I was always a day late, $1 short, and going in the wrong direction. But that's comfort for me. My dad was always getting mad. Now I say, I hate that. I don't want that. But I go out and marry, and guess what? I set the same thing up. And it's like what we call the post-hypnotic trance. It's like I'm programmed. It's like I'm programmed, and it's real, and it's powerful. And I go out and I act like I came out of my family of origin. I act like I've been trained to act for 18 years. Now, a system that is sick, that's closed, uses people to keep the balance in the system. If one person's an alcoholic, to balance that system, what do you need? You need a codependent or something, right? Now the marriage has gone to pot, and my mom's unhappy and has no intimacy with this guy that's drinking, and she needs a spouse, so what's going to happen in the system? She's going to pick up one of these kids as a surrogate spouse. That was me. I was the family counselor. I started when I was 5 years old. And I've been doing this for 53 years. And I was the counselor. I listened to Mama. Now, how well does a 10-year-old do in marriage counseling? What do you think my stomach felt like? It was in knots. And when Daddy would hit Mama, how do you think I felt? Oh, I felt terrible. I can remember seeing him down at the end of the hall when there was a altercation over where the car keys were, and there was going to be a little drinking thing, and he was going to go and drink, and she said no, and he said yes. And there was a little scuffling, and somebody's got their arm twisted, and somebody got hit. And I saw this going on, and I can remember looking down the hall, and I can remember how my stomach felt. And saw Mother cry, and Dad hit Mom, and he was angry, and he had already started drinking. Do you know what that does to a little kid? I can't handle that. I got to compensate some way. I stuff it. I finally said, I'm not going to get hurt anymore. I'm not going to allow myself to bleed in. I'm not going to get hurt anymore. I'm tired of feeling pain. I am tired of feeling pain and being afraid. It's bad, really bad. And so I started to compensate. I started to stuff. And then I learned that to be a man, okay, you don't feel. If you're tough, you don't cry. Stop bawling, you little stink, okay? I'll give you something to cry about. Well, you little weenie. What are you crying for? You don't cry. Somebody beats you up at school, you go back and you get them. You don't let them do that. When I was little, my dad, and I wanted my dad's approval. Dad would teach me how to fight. I remember him on his knees and me boxing him. And then I'd hit him and he'd fall over. Whoa, you know, that's pretty big stuff. And he used to tell me how he used to fight, how he used to have guns, and how he used to use brass knuckles, how they fought all the time. What do you think I idealized in my life? Being tough, being bad. Do you understand? I don't mean bad in an evil sense. I mean bad being tough. But see, the problem was I had these feelings. I didn't feel real good when I hit somebody in the mouth. I didn't feel real good when I hit somebody in the nose. I didn't really feel good, but I couldn't admit that, could I? Could I admit that? Nah, not and be tough, not and be bad. So I hated girls. I hated mushy movies. Anything that had to do with emotions or crying. I stopped that when I was about 10 or 12, and I never cried again until I was about 55. Never cried. Never cried. Because when you cry, you lost control. And you had to be in control. Because if you're not in control, you might be exposed in this shame-based family. And so what happens is I started stuffing my feelings. And I started to deny everything that was feminine in me. Because feminine was bad. I had a couple bad teachers that were real man-haters. And they always let the girls march in the front. And the girls always got to go to recess first. And us guys always had to sit in there. So I was very, very, very discriminated against, I thought, as a kid. Because I had a couple old maid school teachers, unfortunately, and they did not like boys. And that came across. And there was about 2 or 3 of them right in a row, like 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. So I thought, okay, you know. And then they'd make us play with the girls. And my mother kept girls, I should say. During the war, she babysat girls. They'd stay at our house so the mothers would work in the factories during the Second World War. And I'd have to play with 5 or 6 of these girls, and I was the only boy. And they were clumsy, and they were nasty. And they would cheat for each other, and lie for each other, and stick together on everything. How do you think my feminine outlook got? Ooh, raunchy. It was terrible, and I didn't like girls. And then they were clumsy. You'd play with them, and they'd stick you in the eye or something stupid. I remember one summer, no less than 3 times, my finger got slammed in the car door. I just hated them. And another time I can remember, this is the kind of family we lived in, and I can remember my dad says, if you go out and get that thing dirty again, you're going to get blood poison. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If you go out and get this, because I'd always get my bandage dirty from playing, when my skin was pulled way back here. It was a real bad one. I should have gone to the doctor. Looking at it now, I think, good heavens. I was always a different finger. I still got my nails bent from those car doors. These silly, awkward, clumsy girls that couldn't play. Oh, okay. And what happened? You get the feel for this? And if you get your bandage dirty again, I'm going to stick your finger in iodine. And I went out and got my finger dirty again. Guess what happened? My dad stuck my finger and I had to hold it in iodine. I want to tell you, that's one of the things I can remember before I was age 12. I don't remember a whole lot of stuff. A lot of my childhood is gone. I just suppressed it. But I can remember that. Made a good impression on me and I cried. But hey, now I look back at that and you know what I do? I'm mad, man. Hey, I learned about mercurochrome. And mercurochrome doesn't burn like that. What was he thinking? Is that punishment? Is that cruel? Yes, and I can remember how bad that iodine hurt on that great big cut. Boy, I just died. I cried like that. I was about 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there. We kept kids from the time I was about 7 to 11, so this happened during that time. So I got some real bad opinions of girls, and so I didn't like them. And besides that, my dad told me that only weenies cried, and that I had to be tough, and I had to play ball, and I had to be fast, and I had to punch hard. And I never could let anybody insult me. I had a fight every day. It was either at school or it was at home, in the block. And that's the way we all did. And that was glorified. That was glorified. Being tender, being kind, being nice was not glorified. That was feminine, that was weak. And so part of our male macho junk that we get in America today is that men aren't supposed to have feelings. That comes from this dysfunction stuff. That men are not supposed to have feelings. I'm ashamed if I cry. That means I've lost control. That means there's something feminine and weak about me. And I can remember in this one therapy group I was in, there was about 10 of us, 12 of us, and there's always a preponderance of women, so there's only about 4 guys and about 10 women or something like that. And I can remember this one guy was a real twit, and every time it'd come his turn to talk about his problem, he'd start bawling. I was so embarrassed to be a man in that room with him. I thought, how horrible for a man to sit and cry. I can imagine him in the army. Somebody yelling at him, he'd sit down with his rifle and cry. It's just inconceivable to me. I would never want to go anywhere with him, never depend on him. Where am I coming from? Do you hear this distortion? Do you hear what I'm thinking? On the line, you run the ball through and you hit him and he sits down between plays and cries. What's happening to this little boy here? What is happening is I'm being shamed. I'm being ashamed of my feminine, gentle, what we call feminine characteristics. Do you think it's easy for me coming through a thing like that to be intimate with my wife? To cry with my children? Do you think my kids have ever seen me cry? Now, as I begin to alienate and split away from me, all of those things that I think are terrible and awful from this family that I've learned, from my father not to cry, to be tough, to be bad. And along with this other stuff, with this woman thing, I start to develop a real complex here. I start to get some very deep prejudices and some problems. And I'm not feeling my feelings anymore. I become dissociated with my feelings. I'm not feeling. And because I don't feel, it's difficult for me to relate with my wife. And difficult for me to relate with my children because I've started to numb. Because I've decided not to have feelings. First, they're wrong. Second, I don't want my feelings because guess what all my feelings are? Are they happy feelings? They're not happy feelings, they're pain. I can remember my father taking me, when I got a little older, hunting. And I grew up in Hawaii. We hunted pigs, and as a result, I learned to hunt in a different way than you hunt around here. You hunt with dogs, and you get very much into the hunt. No place for somebody who cries. Let me finish that story with this guy that cried first. As he cried in the group, I can remember how uneasy I felt, and how mad I was at him for crying and betraying. You see, he could do what I needed to do, but I couldn't do. And the women thought he was wonderful. They rushed around him after class, and they hugged him. I thought, hey, what's that all about? And he would just pour tears. And the women just loved him and thought he was wonderful. And I thought he was the biggest weenie that walked this face of the earth. And I resented him. I was ashamed of him and everything else. And the women, I said, why would you like him? How could he ever protect you? How could he go out in the world and fight? How could he do that? Well, that doesn't matter. What do you mean it doesn't matter? How are you going to get the car fixed? How is he going to make the dollar? How is he going to go out there and compete? How is he going to carry the ball? That doesn't matter. He's so vulnerable. We had a bunch of codependents in there, okay? He's so wonderful. It's so wonderful. A man that has feelings. Ooh! And they thought that was wonderful. A man that had feelings. I thought he was a nervous wreck, all right? Okay, let me tell you part of my conditioning not to have feelings. I can remember once when I was little, and I had a BB gun, and then we'd go hunt, then we'd shoot birds and stuff. It always hurt me when I shot a bird. I didn't want to shoot a bird, because I liked little birds, and I didn't want it. But could I pretend that that hurt me? I really couldn't. In Hawaii, when you hunt pigs, what you do is you go out with maybe 10, 20, 30 dogs. And the way you go is you go through the jungle. You get up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and you go out into the jungle in these trucks, and you take these dogs, and you turn them loose. And there's some that are trackers, and some that are grabbers, and some always bark and never do anything. But they're all scarred up, these dogs. So my dad and I, this is part of our macho stuff, man. Part of this male bonding, okay, you've heard about. And we're tough, man. We're bad. And so we get up, and we go out, and we get into the jungle, and you have to get to the pig really quick because they start tracking. And when they find the pigs, you got to get there quick because a big pig will kill a lot of dogs before you get there. And I can remember coming up on these pigs and running through the jungle and stumbling and jumping and trying to get there. And sometimes you'd have to shoot the pig, but a lot of times the way it was done, when the dogs had the pig down, you'd cut the pig's throat. This is a wild boar, people. I was like 16, 18, 20. I never thought about it at all. You just did it. You just did it. You just jumped in there, and there was ears laying on the ground and blood and all things fighting. And there was this terrible noise and racket and smell and all the senses and this violence. What's that about? And you'd stick the pig and you'd saw the knife out, and the dogs would go crazy. They were just wild. And then it was all done, and you'd sit there and clean off the blood, and you'd wonder, and that was hunting, man. That was murder. That was slaughter. That was terrible, but that's the way we hunted. And then when I went to college, it's an area where you deer hunt. And so my wife and I didn't have a lot of money, and so I would go hunt deer. And then we'd grind it up with beef suet and everything. Okay, and I was grind up this stuff with enough beef suet, my wife would eat it. And we had 100,000 different kinds of casseroles. But I'd go out and drop a deer, and then I'd go get another one, because in some areas they were overloaded, and you'd have to get a special permit to go in this other area where they were going to starve if you didn't take some out, and I'd get a second deer every year. And I can remember the first deer that I got. And I was walking along, and I was thinking where these deer would be coming up. I had not hunted deer before, but I figured the way the ground was and the way they'd be coming, these hunters are all making all kinds of noise down there. And so I figured I'd plant myself and let them drive the animals that ought to be in those trees up here. So sure enough, out comes this deer. And I saw it coming, and I just let it keep coming closer and closer and closer, and it got about 100 yards and saw me, started to go up the side, and so I shot it. This was after I was in the Army. Just a shot from 100 yards away. There was no violence. It didn't fight back. It was nothing. And I thought, oh, that's terrible to kill that animal. I rationalized it because I needed the meat, and so I took it. But I can remember the difference in feeling of how to kill in Hawaii versus how to kill here, and what that did to me inside. To finish this story, I don't care if you know if I went hunting or not. That's not important. I'm trying to tell you something you can relate to how you as men were shamed along these certain lines. You have to play sports, and you got to do this, and you got to be awful, right? I was hunting finally with my father-in-law, and we were sitting on the side of a hill by a rock, and it was going to be light in a little bit, and we were ready. We were both had a weapon, and after a little while the sun comes up, and I noticed behind him, I was talking to him, and I could see off to his side in the back, 300 yards along the tree row, out comes this buck. And he's just grazing along, opening day or something. And he comes walking along, and I watched him come along, and then I said, Grant, right behind you there, about 100 yards off, is a deer, if you want him. He says, no, you take him. I says, I don't want him. He said, what'd you bring a rifle for? And you got a deer tag. I did that for you. You know, if you need a deer, we can get one. He says, I don't want a deer. I says, hey, man, I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, paid all this money, put on my boots, hiked out here. I got my fanny froze numb right now. I walked for an hour up the hill to get to this neat spot, and now it's light. I froze, and now you tell me you don't want it. He says, I don't want it. I said, well, neither do I. And the buck walks along a little ways, comes up about 30 yards away and looks at us and sees us, and we don't do anything. And so he walks back into the trees, and he goes. We talk a little bit more, and I say, well, you ready to go? He says, yeah. And that was it. That's the last time I went hunting. What's that all about? Do you think inside of me I really want to kill things? I never did. I never did. But I'm ashamed for those tender feelings. I don't want my wife to see me cry. I don't want my wife to feel that I'm weak. And so I'm not allowed to cry because I attach that with weakness. And that's a terrible thing, because you men that are shamed like I am, and you men who have this same message, that you can't cry, that you can't be tender, that the feminine aspect of you is somehow homosexual or wrong or something bad, that's a terrible message to get. Now, I learned when I was a little teeny with my father on his knees how to box and how to fight, and how to never let anybody, get you good. And from the time I was this tall to the time I went in the service and got back, I was playing this macho game. And when I got married, I was playing this macho game, this male game of what men are supposed to do, the roles. These roles are dysfunctional. And these roles tend to keep our emotions frozen in us so that we can't relate and we can't be intimate. And you can teach your sons to do the same thing. I played football, and I played baseball, and I played basketball. Football is what got me hurt. Got my neck hurt, got my hand hurt, my ankles are gone. Luckily, I still have my knees, one of them. And all of that, what for? Run as hard as I can and crash into another human being, knock him out, hopefully. That's macho, man. I hit that sucker so hard they drug him off. He won't be back in until next quarter. I'm sure I got him a good lick. And I catch myself watching football, and one of my favorite plays is when that end goes up in the air about 6 feet and 4 guys hit him. Arms and legs go everywhere. Oh, that's cool. And I'll be addicted to that thing, just like everybody else. I don't know what's wrong with me. There's something about the competition. There's something about this. Now, when it came time for my boys to play football, what do you think I said? You can play baseball, you can play basketball, but you cannot play football. Boy, were they upset.
This concludes the program on this side of the cassette. To continue the program, please turn the cassette over.
Boy, were they upset. Dad! Whoa. They didn't like it. When I left for 1 year, when my one son was a junior, I had a job where I was out of town except on weekends. And so the whole family kept the secret while he went out for football. And I didn't know all year. He went out for football, and he was really good. The quarterback on the team had hurt his hand really bad, and so my son used to love to pass. He could throw a country mile. He was fast. And he went in at quarterback and carried about 11 yards per carry. It was really good. So there's a certain amount of resentment for my sons, but they've all got their knees, they've all got their necks, they've all got their backs, they've all got their ankles. I just can't see playing this stupid game for the entertainment of a bunch of screaming people in the stands. So I'm trying to break away from this system. I'm trying to break away, and it's hard. And the system doesn't break away easily because we have certain roles here. Let's look at this addict. The addict and the codependent have a conflictual relationship. So here are some of the kinds of addictions. The addict can be addicted to alcohol or drugs, or they can be a sexaholic, a workaholic, a rageaholic, into control, obsessive control. They can have an eating disorder. You ever see any of those? Yeah. They can gamble. They can shop. They can do anything they want. And the basis of that addiction is that the person is covering their anxiety and handling their anxiety through their addiction. It's a mood-altering activity that takes away the pain. And as long as they're raging or blaming somebody else, they don't have to work on their own stuff. Okay, you got a comment here?
What happens in a situation like that when the codependent stops?
Stops being codependent?
Yes.
Well, then you got only one person pulling on the tug-of-war rope. And this individual has to go someplace else. All right? And in a typical case, if mother stopped being codependent, what I would expect in the system would be somebody else take up the codependent role for the system to maintain its balance and equilibrium. That's what I would expect. But here's the key. When you start working with a system, when somebody changes and somebody changes the game, that throws the system out of balance and other people have to react. Like I told you. When you as a parent stop being rescuer, codependent with your children, when you stop that, that changes the environment. And all of a sudden, they're having to be responsible for their own money, their own time management, their own clothing, their own bedroom. And as you start that, they've got to adapt or die, right? Because the clothes are gone. Because you take the clothes, you take the bed, you take whatever is out of order. So the co-addict, then when we change the behavior with one person, then that upsets the whole balance of the system. Okay, these are the roles that this addict can play. He can be the offender, he can be the victim, and we'll talk about the drama triangle next week, or he can be a rebel, he can be a scapegoat. My father was all of those, and he switched back and forth all the time. My mother, on the other hand, what was she into? She was into worry, her codependency, she was into sadness, she was never into religion, but they could be, And the roles of the mother or the codependent would be to enable, to be a martyr, to be a mediator, to be a super spouse, to be a saint. These are roles that you play. The thing about this is that these roles become ingrained in you, and they get ingrained in the children. And then the children carry these roles that they learned in the dysfunctional system into their own family, to create a new nuclear family with a spouse, and they raise children. And they carry this dysfunction, these roles with them. Now in family systems, Bowen says that the most important factor is the sibling position, is the position of the child and the role that they have assumed. Let's look at some of the roles. There's something like 100, 150 of these roles, all right? Okay, number one, you can be a hero. You can be the hero of the family. You get a messed up parent and a messed up family. To give the family dignity, somebody can be the hero, the superachiever, the valedictorian. Sometimes these kids feel such pressure to succeed. It was like a story that I heard. The guy called me and said, my son is the valedictorian. He was the class president. He was that in high school, and he was that in college. Everything. And now he's graduating from school, and he called me up, and guess what he said? He's committing suicide. Nobody has given that kid permission to be normal, not to have to succeed and be first on everything. No one's given him permission to be normal. And the kid is tired of it. He's had it. He's on stage all the time. He's got to be a superachiever all the time. And your kids can pick that up if you lay that on them. Is this possible? You are so invested in your own image as a parent or a person that you're going to require that that child perform at superhuman levels in order to give you the satisfaction that you need in that system. And so you're living through that kid and you're pushing that kid. I've talked to parents who are upset with their kids that aren't learning to read because they think that if those kids are super kids and super smart, then they're super what? They're super parents, and they're invested in their image, and they're ruining those kids, and they're sitting on those kids, and those kids can turn around and rebel. But some kids take the role of hero. That's a hard role. Sometimes if the role of hero is there, and somebody's already got the role of hero, and somebody's already got the role of good student, and somebody's already got the role of athlete, and the next kid comes along, guess which role he takes? Rebel. That was our case. You just described our family. Okay, the fourth one was the rebel. So, these kids can become the little parent, and some of these kids that are 5 years old are acting like a little grandpa. All right, you ever seen a kid like that? Okay, they can be the victim, they can be ill, they can be dad's little buddy, and this is the role they get into. Now, the kid gets his strokes. The system strokes this kid and rewards this kid for these crazy roles. All right, and this is the family counselor. That was me. And then the winner, the genius, the kid that's real smart. The kid falls into these roles, and that's how they get their identity in the dysfunctional system. Now, think for a minute about your families. Are any of your kids the good one? Are any of your kids the shy one? Are any of your kids the good student, the saint, the one that's always good? Now, we had Angela. Anything you asked Angela to do, she would do. She would cook and sew and bake bread and babysit and clean, worked all the time just like her mother. And we couldn't get the boys to do anything. The boys fought and argued and ticked me off and snuck out at night. Can you believe that? The other boys were fighting me. They were working out their problems. And Angela just pleased everybody. Oh, she wanted to please everybody, and that's where she got it. Okay, so we've got mom's scapegoat, the underachiever. The underachievers need special help. Now, when mom and dad are having problems in their marriage, could you believe that a child could volunteer to be the scapegoat? Could you believe that at some level a kid would know enough in order to bring mom and dad back that the child would run away from home or the child would get into drugs? And what would happen then? Mom and dad are fighting. Now the kid's into drugs. What happens to that relationship? Boom. What's that called? We learned last week. Triangulating. Okay, that could be triangulating. That child now is being picked up on the third leg of that triangle to stabilize the dysfunctional relationship in this marital dyad here. So the child now is being picked up to stabilize that bad marriage. Okay, underachiever, a designated patient, and people come in for therapy, and they say, hey, fix little Johnny here. He's having all kinds of trouble at school. He's doing this, he's doing that. He's running around with these people, and whatever he's doing. This is terrible. And guess what the therapist is thinking? Why is this kid doing this? And the therapist wants to talk about the marriage, and so they say, we'll go to another therapist. Right? Does that happen? You bet. The identified patient is the boy. They bring the kid in and they say, fix this kid. And the kid is the symptom bearer of the dysfunctional system. And he's coming in with problems to keep the thing together. So that a lot of that energy no longer has to be directed at mom and dad and their fighting, it's directed toward the kid. So the therapist, not knowing any better, he fixes the kid. And when he fixes the kid, what happens to the marriage? It gets worse again. So Herkimer runs away again. Okay, can you see how this can be madness? Do you think anybody's doing this at a conscious level? No, but it's working. Okay, so we have the addict. One of these roles can be another addict. My son volunteered to be an addict. Or you can be a surrogate spouse. I was a surrogate spouse with my mother, counselor. And then the caretaker, someone that's always taking care. My mother was a caretaker in her home. She took care of the 5 little kids, the 3 boys and the 2 girls, I guess it was. One of them was a crippled boy. Here's the sunshine. I can remember my dad picking my little sister up and putting her in a high chair and saying, here's Daddy's sunshine. And he's just picking that up from where he came from. The lost child. We can have the rebel. We can have the perfect kid. We can have the saint. We can have the pretty child. We can have mom's enabler. We can have the heroine. We can have the confidant, the religious one, the rascal, the clown, the cute one, the sick one, the problem child. We can have the overachiever, the athlete, the peacemaker, that's kind of a counselor deal. The family referee, who's responsible to keep things going and keep everybody happy, who's always the go-between. The offender, the mascot, and the loser. You'll never learn anything. You're a lost cause. You're just like your mother. She hadn't got any sense, and you'll never learn this calculus, and we just give up on you. Okay, can you see how this dysfunctional system creates roles to sustain the system? Now, I want you to do some reflection. And your kids are each falling into some roles. Can you be real honest and give some thought to this for a little while? Now, let's pursue this. Who's got some kids with some roles?
Unless I'm unusual, I think everybody was raised in a dysfunctional family. When we find out that we're addicted to things, there's probably 2 or 3 things that I can think of that have helped me stuff some of the things down that I stuff. When do you find out that it's an addiction or if it's just a way to get by?
Okay. Well, some people say that an addiction is present when the ability to choose is being lost. So an addiction is that which we do to alleviate our anxiety in the framework that I'm talking about. In other words, an addiction is a mind-altering situation or drug or something that takes my mind off my pain. Now, for instance, raging. If I've got a lot of stuff I need to work on, and as long as I can rage and blame out here and externalize this thing and look all about out here, I don't have to deal with my dysfunctional marriage. I don't have to deal with my pain. And so I deliberately am obsessively, compulsively acting out in order not to have to focus on and deal with the issues inside of me. So can you see how I can get lost in my work doing that?
Well, see, the way I see it is anything I do, I'm doing for that then.
No, we're talking about obsessive, okay, and compulsive. Obsessive is almost an inability to control your thinking. You're thinking about it all the time. You're thinking about it. You're obsessing on it. And compulsive means that you react and you act to this situation over and over again in a way that's very, very difficult for you to control. So obsessive compulsive behavior is really very simple. If I have pain and I'm in pain and I can take a pill and kill that pain, and I take a pill and I kill that pain, and I take another pill and I kill that pain, every time I have that, this becomes a habitual behavior.
But see, if I've got 5 different things that will kill that pain, and I just use them randomly, for instance, the church, sports.
Keep yourself occupied somewhere else.
Yeah, anything that keeps my attention.
Yes. Is that mood altering?
Sure.
Yes.
But that's...
Well, don't think that you need to be limited to one addiction. Can I be a workaholic, a churchaholic, a sexaholic? You bet I can, or I can really go for it. Like I say, if you're going to have an addiction, get a good one. Get something you can afford.
But I don't ever see this changing.
It does. Now, how you do that is you start to come out of denial. And we'll talk about that in the mourning process. The very, very first issue here is denial. What is denial? Denial is just really non-awareness. Denial isn't saying necessarily, no, I don't have a problem. Denial is really unawareness. We have what we call the mourning process, to grieve, the grieving process. Now, I went to my father, and I wanted deeply, and naturally, instinctively, a father-son relationship. I didn't get it. He was absent. He was working, he was drinking, he was fighting with mom, and I just felt like I never had a relationship with my father, a warm relationship. And as I got older, and I started to realize that, first of all, I didn't even realize it for years and years. But we would fight and we'd argue all the time. And I was disappointed at a level I really didn't comprehend. But I was angry about it. Now, when I started to realize, and I went into therapy, and I started to realize that I was grieving over this, that I was angry about it, and I started to get in touch with my feelings for the first time with this issue, I got really angry. So denial is the first step in starting to mourn. Now, this is what you're doing coming out of this. This is an answer to your question. Are we stuck there forever? No, we're not stuck there forever. The grieving process, the mourning process, is the process of healing. It's the process of getting past. And I'll describe this issue for you in my own case, and you can apply it. All right. First of all, I was in what they call denial. I did not realize that I was mourning and I was upset about the problem with my father not having a relationship. I didn't realize that. But as we started to talk about it in therapy and trying to get behind my compulsive workaholism, churchaholic or workaholic, so it can be the same. They started asking me about my relationships. And as I started to talk, I was getting angry at my father. And I was recalling conversation after conversation we had when we would argue. And you could not reason with him. Looking back, I want you to understand that my father, is an 80-year-old, 5-year-old child. That he thinks and acts and talks like a 5-year-old child. He's emotionally a 5-year-old child. You cannot reason with him. He makes up his mind and then arranges the facts in the world to make it come out the way he said. And as a 10-year-old even, I was getting through that logically. That's crazy making. I used to sit down and scratch my head while I told him that yesterday. And we turned it around. One time we had an argument about the moon. We had an argument that went on for like a month about the moon. I had learned that the moon is always facing the earth. And that means that it rotates once on its axis to keep its face always to the earth. And I said, Dad, I found out something in school. And I told him, he says, now you're crazy. The moon never turns. You always see the same side. I said, that's my point, Pop. Look. And I took a ball and I took an orange and I marked it. And I says, look how it moves. See how it has to turn once as it goes around. And he would not believe it. And I'd stop halfway and I'd turn it back this way and over to here. Look, Pop. And it was like talking to a post, I'd get angrier and angrier. And I'd go back. See, I just bite. The next day I'd go back and I'd try it again. Dad, I figured it out how to explain this to you. And then he'd get all upset and I'd get upset. And I said, Dad, you are so stupid. Don't you talk to me like that. You go to school and think you're so smart. Shut up, And then I'd say, I was getting mad. It was a matter of principle now. I was going to teach it to him. And I was going to prove now that I was right. Was I just biting? Hooked in? He was still in his games. I don't know my dad. I don't think he ever came out of his games. If he ever comes out of his games, I'll say, who are you? Because I don't know him. I don't think he ever came clean. He's an alcoholic. He played games with Grandma. He was trained. He never changed. And so finally, after about a month, I heard him talking to somebody. He says, yeah, I was trying to explain to my son how that once a month, the moon actually turns once on its axis, all the way around here. I was sitting there and says, what? Afterwards I said, Dad, I'm the one who says the moon turns once as it goes around the earth. He says, no, I'm trying to tell you that, you fool. And I've been trying to explain that to you for a month. And that's crazy making, people. That's crazy making. I'd sit there thinking, well, what did I say? What did I say? See, this man is God. This man is God, isn't he? That's Dad. And to be secure in my life, I can't say he's crazy. My whole world becomes insecure, especially when you're younger. That's the way my childhood was. But he was smart, and he always hooked me. I was always going around like this. Always like that. One time after another. I was always hooked into some stupid game. And guess who always won? Yeah, and even when I was right, he took it away. If he always had to be right, then I always had to be what? And a dysfunctional person always has to be right. They're into perfection. They've always got to be right. I don't care how damaging it is to the kid, they've got to be right because they have these narcissistic needs that were never met. They needed to be loved. Were they loved? In all his life, Grandpa never heard once from Grandma, "I love you." With a hug, "I love you. I love you. You're a wonderful boy. I'm so glad I have you as a son. You make my life happy. I'm so glad that you're in our home. You're a wonderful little boy." Did he ever hear that once? All he heard was nag and complain and getting on his case. And Grandma says, "You can't drink," so guess what he did? "You can't smoke," so guess what he did? "You can't carouse," so guess what he did? So he started playing these games with his mother. And when he married my mother, who was supposed to be his wife, he was really marrying his mother so he could continue the game on forever and raise crazy kids. That's what that was all about. Now then, when you're in denial, you are just not aware of the craziness. Now I am aware. And when you become aware, you have a choice. You can say, "I can stop it. I don't have to be like that anymore." And when I started to differentiate, remember that term from last week? When I started to individuate from my family of origin and all their goofiness, they got mad because I wouldn't play the game anymore. I started to unhook. And when Dad called up and complained about Mom, I'd call Mom and tell him exactly what he had said. And Dad doesn't tell me any more secrets. Am I happy? I don't want to be triangulated. I don't want to be dumped on. No dumping. Do not emotionally dump on me. You do your own stuff at home. Don't come dump on me. Because after you got through dumping on me, I'd be like this. And he'd feel pretty good now. Go back and he could stand Mom again for a while. He had dumped on me, unloaded a big load. I didn't even charge him a fee. I just tried to figure out what on earth has gone wrong. Why am I so unhappy? See, no wonder my hair was falling out when I was 18. Okay, so denial. You come out of denial. Now, what happens when you come out of denial? Look what he's been doing to me. I get angry. And I was angry. And I had a right to be angry. Look what he'd done to me to screw me up like this. And I'm still tweaked. And it's because I'm still compensating for all that went on before. This is the grieving process. Now, I want you to understand simply, it is through the grieving process that you get past this stuff. So you can let it go, so you do not have to be compulsive. You don't have to be a workaholic. Okay, you can start letting it go. You don't have to compensate. What is all this addiction for? It's compensating. See, as long as I can work and produce more than anybody else, I can fill this hole in my soul. Remember the source? I'm shamed. I go to my dad for love. He's not there for me. I go to my dad for this need. I'm frightened. I go to my dad because I want to play. I go to my dad because I'm lonely. I go to my mom for this, that, and the other. They're not there for me. And I become ashamed of my feelings. I become ashamed to be needy. I'm ashamed to be vulnerable, so I can't cry. I'm ashamed to fear, so I don't fear. I start turning down all the emotions. The only emotion I have is anger, high and low. All right? I'm allowed anger. Okay, so now I'm angry, and I'm upset with Pa. Then I start bargaining, and you hear stuff like this. Well, like the guy told me, he says, "Man, my dad was an alcoholic, and he beat me, and I survived it. Look at me." And I say, "I rest my case." He's all screwed up. But we start saying, "It's not so bad. I survived it," and we don't recognize the damage that was being done. Oh, it's okay. But then we get into it, and we do recognize that it did hurt us, and I understood it, and I was depressed about it, and I felt bad about it. How come it was my lot to be born in an alcoholic home? Why did I have to endure that garbage? Why did I have to live with a bunch of crazy makers? Why did I have to get all tweaked so that now that I'm married, I can't have a normal relationship with my wife? It's terribly difficult for me to be intimate because I feel shamed. If I open up, what's going to happen? If I open up, my wife will see me, and she'll see what a rat, that this guy is no good. Because I feel shamed. I'm ashamed to be needy. I can't go to my wife and say, "I need you. I hurt. Can you help me? Can you love me? Am I lovable? Can you accept me? Am I okay?" I don't want to risk that because I've been rejected and rejected and rejected in my family of origin. So I've said, I don't need you people. I'm not going to need anymore. I'm not going to be vulnerable anymore. Hang it in your ear. I don't have to be vulnerable. I don't want to need anything. I don't want that, so I'm not going to feel. What kind of life is that? You get stuck with it. But then later I feel, after I started to understand, I become angry about it. I try to rationalize it away, another defense mechanism, right? And then I get depressed. I feel real bad about my family. I feel real bad that mom was a codependent. I feel real bad that my son is an alcoholic and a drugaholic. I feel real bad that all of these things are happening. And why did this have to happen? Why couldn't I have a good life? Why couldn't I come from a normal home? Heck, at that time I didn't know normal was goofy. We are producing in America dysfunctional people. We're producing in America dysfunctional families because we're passing on this stuff and these values. Okay, and finally, I got to a point where I could accept it. Now, when I got to a point I could accept it, I unhooked. I got through my anger with Dad. And do you want to know what it was for me? When I realized that it wasn't my father's fault, that he was not malicious. He really wasn't malicious. He was a needy child. And I saw him for a grown-up, pathetic, 5-year-old child that was emotionally unable to meet my needs as a child. He could not do it. And why should I be angry and upset about a guy like that? So the bottom line is that I accept my father for who he is. I accept him for what he is. I say I know he did the best he could. He did the best he could. And I'm going to go on with it. I've given up with it. Every once in a while I'll find another piece and I get angry again. And I'll accept it again. And I go through this. Now, as long as I've stuffed this stuff down here, let me draw this thing. I've got this line coming down here. I've got this anger thing here, okay? And if I'm told that I can't have anger, I start stuffing it. I start stuffing it, and I pretend there's no anger. I just smile all the time. Everything is okay. I just play the game, a dysfunctional game, that everything is okay. And so what I'm doing is I'm just building up negative emotions over here. I'm building up negative emotions. And they just build and build and build, and the pendulum goes clear over here, and when they blow over here, I go into a rage because it's uncontrolled anger. And as I blow it over to here, because it's stuffed, normally I should be angry and I should spout it out. This is like a big oil well down here. And so it starts to build and build and build, and if I can't vent, and if I can't dump my anger is inappropriate, or my anger is bad, or I'm punished for anger, and I'm told I can't be angry, it's not right, then I stuff over to here, and finally I blow. And then it's rage, and that's when I can hurt somebody. That's when child abuse takes care of. This is like permissive and autocratic parenting. And so finally my rage is here, and I hurt people, and I scream and I holler, and then guess what goes along with that? My guilt. Now that's no good, and I go back to stuffing again. See the phenomenon? And I go back and forth. Okay, are you getting the idea for this? Can you see that this mourning process is the healing process? It's a very necessary part of the healing process. That to process this and to go through it, acknowledge your pain, say Mom and Dad couldn't help it, to admit it, to work with it, and get rid of it and unhook is part of the healing process. So you can get over your addictions. I want to tell you, for my own self, this has really worked. I'm differentiated enough now where I can go to my family of origin and they can say crazy things and I just consider the source. It doesn't make sense. I can't make sense out of it. People are goofy.